I'm Thomas Smith from the Generator podcast, and Google just announced something that's really big in the world of search, both for users and for SEO pros. And I've been doing SEO for about 10 years, so I've been sort of following along on this journey. I started building niche websites about a year and a half ago as well, so I've been really tuned into the SEO world. And there's been a lot of interest and apprehension about, what's Google going to do with generative AI? What are they building towards? We saw Google Bard come out, and a lot of people were a little underwhelmed by it, but still wondered, okay, how is this going to be built into search? My prediction was that Google was really tailoring Bard specifically for search. It doesn't do as well as ChatGPT, for example, on things that aren't search related, but I think it's being built for that specific use case. And Google just announced that they are, sort of spilling the beans on what they plan to do with search and generative AI. And it has a lot of implications, again, for users, but also for SEOs. So today we're going to talk about that and some takeaways for SEOs to know, how do you respond to this shift. So firstly, let's take a quick look at what they're actually saying that they're going to do. So they made an announcement. It was Elizabeth Reed, their vice president and general manager of search, announced that they are now starting to work generative AI into search. And at the moment, it's just in their labs section. So it's not something you're going to see in Google unless you opt into it or you go into that labs section, sort of acknowledging that it's a beta test. But, expect, obviously, that this is going to get rolled out more broadly if it is successful. And essentially what it's going to look like is sort of like a featured snippet at the top of a search engine results page. So if you are familiar with SEO, you know that Google's been moving in the direction of these featured snippets, where if you search for something, maybe I search, what's the weather in San Francisco? Instead of showing me a web page and making me just click through to learn that, they might pull some piece of information out of that web page and put it at the top of the results with a link to the page. So maybe it would say, in May in San Francisco, it tends to be chilly, and, here's some more information. And that's the featured snippet. And that's been done for a while. And basically what it looks like they're planning to do with generative AI is sort of use it to turbocharge those featured snippets, not just grab a chunk of text out of the article and put it there with a link, but actually pull the information from the article and write something that just answers the question in detail, probably in most cases, as we'll see, integrating information from multiple articles, and then to have links that basically cite its sources and send people back to whoever created those articles. So the example that Google gives in their announcement is a query like, what's better for a family with kids under 3 and a dog, Bryce Canyon or Arches? So travel destinations. And, normally if you put that into Google, you'd have to sort of break it down and say, okay, best places for kids, Bryce Canyon or Arches, dog-friendly Bryce Canyon, dog-friendly Arches. You'd have to go through and make sure you were looking at articles that were for younger kids, not teenagers or whatever. Maybe you'd have to figure out, okay, what's reputable? Which of these is like an ad and which one is actually a person who went there and knows what they're talking about, or maybe a local tourism board or a news article. And there's be a lot of research and manual sort of digging that you would have to do. And the example that Google gives is, okay, instead of doing all that and having that sort of manual process, this new system would essentially break down that query, figure out what it is that you're after, and then actually generate you a response. And the example it gives is something that basically writes out, both Bryce Canyon and Arches National Park are family friendly, although both parks prohibit dogs on unpaved trails. Bryce Canyon has 2 paved trails that allow dogs. So it's basically writing you a custom blog post almost in response to the query. And importantly for SEOs, it does that, it pulls the information in and writes it up, but it also, it links to its sources. So it provides almost like a visual sort of results, like a carousel of the stories that it drew from in order to answer that question. And so the hope is that users would click on one of those if they wanted to dig in further. Okay, I heard about these trails. There's 2 trails that are dog friendly. Let's learn a bit more about them. Okay, like maybe there's an article that surfaces that says dog friendly Bryce Canyon, and I'll click through to that blog and read the full article to understand it. So that's the concept, is that it's gonna, instead of just kind of making you do the research, the new system is going to do that research for you using AI, essentially, pull in multiple sources, and then write it all up in the form of almost like a little blog post that's custom to your query, citing its sources so you can do more research or go see the pretty pictures that blogger took or watch a video or whatever, and continue that journey. There's also some changes to shopping. So there's going to be, for product research, a very similar type of process on there. But fundamentally, it's that approach. It's basically, we're gonna write the information out for you instead of making you do the digging. So for users, I think there's a lot of value potentially in that if they do a good job of it, because there's queries that really could be answered using generative AI and good original content, which again we'll get to in a minute. And you don't need to do all that digging. It can just sort of figure it out for you and just write out the answer. For SEOs, it definitely has a lot more implications, and there's a lot to be nervous about, to be excited about, to be curious about in this. For one thing, obviously, if Google is just presenting the information to the user, it's less likely that they're going to click through on a given page because they may have had their question answered. So I think for sites that are really geared towards very specific answers, where it's like a one-sentence answer that you've sort of expanded into a blog post, you should be a little worried about this because, if the question, like I'll give an example from one of my own blogs, if the question is, how many batteries does a Swiffer WetJet take? I have a blog post about that. People click through and they read the blog post, and I get, traffic and I get ad revenue from that. But really the answer is 4 batteries, 4 AA batteries. You probably don't need to read my whole blog post to see that. There's more useful information in it that I think adds value, but Google could just surface that information. And again, they do that with featured snippets already. We've already seen this move. It's not a totally new thing. It's just an acceleration of that shift. And so you could see in the future, if you asked a question like that, Google might pull from my site and say it's AA batteries, pull from somebody else's, say 4 of them, pull from somewhere else and say, here's what you need to know about changing the batteries, or maybe here's how long the batteries last, and give sort of a complete answer. And people might not then click through on the page because they've gotten the information. So if you're just answering the question, you might be in trouble with these changes. I think what that means for SEOs is that you have to go a bit deeper and have a more of a content depth. So don't just answer the question, provide some additional value that might entice the user to click through to that page and to actually read it. So in that example, maybe it's just understanding the user's intent a little bit. Like, why would I search what kind of batteries does a Swiffer WetJet take? Maybe I want to change the batteries. Maybe my Swiffer is out of batteries. And so, maybe that Google would pull out that basic answer. But if your page not only shares the answer, but then goes into, okay, here's how you change the batteries, here's where you can buy the batteries, other information around that query that addresses the user's search intent, that's where I think there's going to be value. And a user might type in a question like that, see the answer, but then still click through on the little carousel that Google's going to show them and go to your site if your title is compelling and it makes it clear that you're going to show them how to change the batteries or where to buy the batteries or whatever. And it just leads them a little bit deeper. So again, more content depth, better content quality. Google has always hated thin content, things that are literally just like a few sentences or an answer. They've already moved away from that by doing more featured snippets where those kinds of things just get pulled out on the SERP without you having to click through on anything. So I think they're accelerating that again. They hate it even more now. They're just going to summarize even more content for you. So that means your content has to be even deeper, even better researched, even more sort of multimedia and compelling than it was before if you want to compete in this new generative environment. Another thing to keep in mind is that there's follow-up questions too. So if you look at the example that they give with Bryce Canyon, there's basically a 3 or 4 paragraph blog post essentially that it writes. And then it says some follow-up questions like, how long to spend at Bryce Canyon with kids? How many days do you need in Arches National Park for kids? So those are sort of a chat function, right? You can continue the conversation with the system and go a bit deeper there. And so again, I think that's something where anticipating user needs, having a better user experience with a logical progression, either from one article deeper, like again, batteries to buying batteries, or on a different but related topic. So maybe it's when you type that in, it says, here's the answer to where you can buy Swiffer's batteries or what kind of batteries you need. But then maybe it also says, here's mops, traditional mops that don't require batteries that you could look for. And that sort of continues that user journey. And I think the hope would be that Google would surface some of your content in these sort of follow-on questions there. And again, we see that often with people also ask questions, right? That your page might rank for a question, and then it might also show up under the PAAs down below, or a related page on your site might show up for the PAA questions. People also ask questions on the same page. And so if you have that depth, if you have those silos devoted to topics that your users care about with a logical progression they can follow, then that gives them a path beyond just having their question answered with the generative. And then the final thing, again, and I sort of touched on this already, is having that authority or those really tight niches or tight silos within a bigger site. Because again, I think like we've seen with PAAs, you can rank, and then you can also rank individual pages from your site under those sort of related queries or PAA questions. And so if you have 100 pages about Swiffer wet jets or about Bryce Canyon, to use their example, then even if they surface some of the information from your page with that generative response on the SERP, then it's still likely that that's going to lead the user to some related page on your site. So maybe you have a kid-friendly Bryce Canyon, but then you also have like a weekend guide, 2 days in Bryce Canyon with kids, or 7 days in Bryce Canyon with kids, or whatever, something that they can lead the user on to next. And you have all this contextual relevance with stuff all sort of relating to each other and really a tight control of the niche, or again, a silo. Like maybe I'm a travel site, but I have 50 pages on Bryce Canyon, and they're all linked together, and they all sort of establish my authority there. I think that'll help a lot too. Again, just to get people beyond question, answer, boom, they leave, to somehow draw them deeper in and get them ideally over to your site where you can actually monetize instead of just sort of giving Google free content. And ultimately, I think the biggest thing here is that, and Google even says this in their announcement, they don't want to kill content sites, right? Like they have a vested interest in you as a publisher, as an SEO, continuing to write great content, do the research, surface great content, partially just because, they're selling ads against it, right? So they want people to keep using the search engine. They want to be able to send traffic off of Google to other places. But also, if they kill all the content sites, they don't have any content to build this whole generative system on. And people are going to start excluding Google's crawlers and things to stop them from processing this. It's going to kind of get ugly from that perspective. So Google wants to create something that balances the needs of the searcher or the user who wants information as soon as possible with as few clicks as possible, sort of summarized and personalized for them, with the needs of publishers who need some incentive for creating this content and getting people over to their site where they can monetize them. So I think Google is motivated to do that. They say in here that they're motivated to do that. And, that this is something they're going to continue to uphold their commitments to ad transparency. They're going to continue to, find relevant products, and that basically they're committed to sending valuable traffic to sites across the web. So quote them on that literally. We are committed to continue sending valuable traffic to sites across the web. So they're cognizant of the fact that this is threatening to SEOs, and I think they're doing a good job. At least they're saying they're going to do a good job of balancing that and making sure that you still get traffic from this new feature. Final thing I would say here is I think this just underscores more and more the importance of video and of good photos. So text is increasingly kind of becoming a commodity. And anyone can write an article, especially now that we have things like ChatGPT, about Bryce Canyon or about whatever the query is, Bryce Canyon for kids. It's sort of several factors. It's EEAT, your experience, authoritativeness, all the stuff Google has loved for a while, that you went there, you actually know about it, you're a real expert. That's still, I think, going to continue to be valuable. And you should emphasize that. We see in the carousel here, the title and a photo from the post gets surfaced. So maybe, your title, instead of just being Bryce Canyon for kids, should be, I visited Bryce Canyon with my 4 kids, and here are my thoughts. Something that makes it clear you're a person and they can get a personal perspective and that EEAT. but then also really compelling photos and really good videos, because that's the thing that's going to make people click through, right? If it's just, a generic photo of Bryce Canyon and they got the information already, there's no reason to click. But if it's like you, a person smiling there with your family and you're on this hike, then they're going to see that and they're looking for stuff. Maybe you're holding your dog or whatever, and it's answering their question. They see you're a real person. It's visually clear to them. They're going to go through. They know you've been there. They know you're similar to them or what they're looking for. They're going to be much more likely to click through on your site and end up being a monetized view. And then also with video, it's not immediately clear how they're going to go about integrating video, but if you look really closely at their little carousel on here, you can see that looks like maybe they're surfacing a video page on here. For people who are listening, I'm looking, there's like a little play button or pause button in the middle of this, so it does look like they're going to be emphasizing that. And again, that's something that generative AI, unlike words, can't handle video nearly as well at this point. I'm sure that'll be coming, but it's not here yet. So video is still sort of a differentiator or a reason for people to click through. And so obviously EAT and video and photos, I think, are going to be even more valuable, and that's something SEOs should focus on. The positive news, again, Google's saying very clearly they're committed to sending you traffic. And the other thing I think is interesting here is when we look at this example, they're showing this generative query, they're showing some of the results that come up, and the results that they're surfacing with the generative query are different than the pages that are showing up down below on the SERP. So maybe this is reading too much into it, but it suggests to me that they're showing how different sources might get surfaced in that generative result than would just show up on the SERP. So maybe you rank number 10, but you happen to have a different perspective or really strong EEAT, or your page is just deep and well written and progresses well, flows well, the AI can understand it. Maybe you're going to get elevated into that sort of prime position at the top of the SERP from the generative query, even though you might be in number 10 position or 20, maybe your content is totally buried from an SEO perspective on the traditional sense, but for some reason it jives with the generative AI, you might get surfaced at the top of the page in the same way that the featured snippet can pull you from a 4th or 5th rank sometimes up to that number 1 slot. So I think that's encouraging. If that's, might be reading the tea leaves a bit too much here, but just from looking at what they've shown, I think that's a good potential outcome. We'll certainly be following this. Head on over to the Generator on Medium, my publication. It's medium.com/the-generator. Find me on Twitter. It's at TomSmith585, TOMSMITH 585. And if you're not already, subscribe to the podcast and follow us, share it out to your friends. We're going to keep analyzing all this stuff with generative AI and specifically around SEO.